Welcome to Engaging Accelerated and Reluctant Readers with Comics, presented by LibraryPass and Comics Plus. This session will be moderated by John Shableski in conversation with our distinguished guests, Jesse Karp, Shveta Miller, Julianne Price, Susannah Richards, and Jana Tropper. If you're on Twitter, you can follow us at LibraryPass News and Comics Plus and share your questions, comments, and insights with us there too. Today's webinar is presented by LibraryPass. We curate high-interest, immersive digital content that helps libraries expand their reach and engagement without breaking their materials budget. Our Comics Plus platform offers unlimited simultaneous access to thousands of digital comics, graphic novels, and manga in collections curated for elementary, middle school, and high school readers. We also offer a complete collection, including thousands of additional titles for older readers to public and academic libraries. Learn more and sign up for a free demo account at comicsplusapp.com. And now I turn it over to John. Enjoy the session.
What I want you guys to do as we get into the intros and talk about who you are, just kind of occurred to me something that I would like to hear is, as you introduce yourself, how long have you been working in this space, and what is your typical audience that you work with as far as reluctant readers, challenged readers, gifted readers? Jesse, let's start with you.
Yes, I'm Jesse Karp. I am a librarian and teacher at Little Red Schoolhouse Elizabeth Irwin High School in New York. Thank you for the thumbs up. I have been teaching there for about 20 years now, using comic books and graphic novels from the very beginning, although that has been a growing area for me, I'm happy to say. I have taught with or about comic books from every age group, from pre-K through graduate school into adult ed over the course of that time.
Alrighty, Julianne Price, you're next.
Yeah, I am Julianne Price. I teach 7th grade language arts in Coppell, Texas, and I've been teaching that for 6 years. And my work with graphic novels and comics started when someone gave me a copy of Roller Girl that they got at the Texas Library Association conference, and has just kind of grown from there. I work with both GT learners, lots of English language learners, and as well as on level and struggling learners. So,
alrighty, next up, Shveta.
Hi everyone, I'm Shveta Miller. I started out with comics as a high school English teacher in New York City public schools, working both in the South Bronx at a Title I high school and also at one of the specialized New York City high schools. My first graphic novel I taught was Persepolis. Since then, I've been a literacy consultant across the country and facilitated professional learning for primarily literacy educators from upper elementary through high school. And now I'm an instructional coach, and I am based out of a school district in Portland, Oregon. And I write regularly about reading and teaching comics for Edutopia, and I have a book coming out we'll talk about later. Primarily, I've worked with literacy educators, and high school, middle and high school students. But in the past few years, I've done more research and discussion with K-12 educators of all content areas and how to integrate both drawing and reading comics into the curriculum.
All right, I'm going to jump Susannah and go to Jana next.
Hi, I'm Jana Tropper. I'm a speech and language pathologist in North Aurora, Illinois, a suburb outside Chicago. I work at a public elementary school with preschool through 5th grade students, and I work exclusively with our self-contained program. So these are students who get the bulk of their instruction in a small classroom with other students that have special education needs. I also am the sponsor of the 5th grade comic book club.
And then last but not least, Susannah Richards.
Hey, I'm Susannah Richards. I'm a professor of reading and language arts at Eastern Connecticut. I have a Ph.D. in gifted ed, interestingly enough. My experience with comics and graphic novels really started about 25 years ago. Even though I had read Mouse as a child, little did I know I would grow up to actually get to hang out with Art Spiegelman. And I work as a literacy consultant in schools all over, from how kids learn to read and the cognitive science of reading to highly able kids who read 2 to 6 years above what we would expect. And I believe that graphic novels and comics are for everyone. And I have a confession, and that is I had to put 40 graphic novels and comics by my side in order to put me in the right frame of mind.
That's commitment there. So what you see here is this broad representation of areas of expertise and also skill levels of readers as well as professionals that these folks all deal with. And what I enjoy about this, though, is the questions we get. It doesn't matter whether it's a room full of PhDs that you're talking to or a room full of parents or new teachers. There is a regular set of questions that we're all prepared to answer. But I think one of the things that strikes me, though, is that perception that people have that comics are just fun. And so two things for that is, how do you defend that conversation and what's wrong with that? So let's see, Shveta, how do you feel?
Well, first, I'll never say anything's wrong with saying comics are fun, because that is certainly a valid experience for reading anything. But I guess the problem with that approach being overstated or emphasized is just that it can end there with an emphasis on engagement, engaging striving readers or engaging reluctant readers, as a bridge to other text-heavy books or to more voluminous reading experiences. So yeah, the danger is just in limiting the potential to engagement and fun, and not using that engagement as a launching point to very deep and complex study and rigor with what's in the reading and what it can offer you cognitively, and expanding your worldview and challenging your assumptions, and then also just learning a new set of tools for telling all kinds of stories yourself.
So what's wrong with reading being fun?
Exactly.
That's my question. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, I mean, I just can't imagine, even as a child, if I was the 12-year-old or 13-year-old in my classroom that had a graphic novel in their hands that they loved, or a manga, and someone said, oh, well, that's just fun reading. Like, just how demeaning that is. And if that's the one book that I feel confident reading, or if that's the one book that I know I've read over and over again, that, like Shveta said, can be a gateway into literacy for so many different things, you've just crushed my spirit. And now maybe reading shouldn't be fun, or maybe the kinds of books I'm reading are not acceptable. And so then I've stopped my reading. And that's when illiteracy starts coming into play for their life. So.
Jana, you want to say it? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Susannah. I saw you.
No, it's either way. I think it's so incredibly important for people to know that at the turn of the 20th century, we read almost all people read mostly in images and less in text, because the ability to decode text wasn't available to all people, because it is something that has to be taught. And at some point, Shveta and I have talked a little bit about this. At some point, we got this idea that if there were visuals, it wasn't sophisticated enough. And I'm going to tell you that somebody like Gareth Hines' Iliad is as sophisticated as you want for a child. And the answer to the graphic novel is always yes. There is new science, fMRI science, that we've never had before, that talks about the fact that our brains are simultaneously interpreting the visual and textual images. And basically that connection is stronger than with them separately. So we're really super excited about that. So this idea that there's a reason not to read a graphic novel is really, really inaccurate. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing so many classic books having been translated into the graphic novel format. And there's going to continue to be an explosion about that. And we're super excited about that.
Well, don't you find, to me, it's interesting that this conversation, or the buzz phrase for visual literacy, becomes hotter and hotter every year. It's not really new. Two guys, Pulitzer and Hearst, made a lot of money off of visual literacy 100 years ago.
So and then very much so. And then the work that Philip Yanawine and other people did with visual visual thinking strategies and visual storytelling that we're all familiar with. This is really good stuff. The truth of the matter is that you can't drive a car without being able to visually interpret something, because so much of that information is given away visually. And so the truth of the matter is that if you want your child to continue to grow cognitively, graphic novels are actually the way to go, because they're a format of delivery and they cross everything. I mean, sitting by my side, I have literally the Iliad, and I have books about Black heroes, and I have all kinds of different things, but I also have fun little graphic novels like The Party, written and illustrated by Sergio Ruggier. So I just think we have to make it okay.
Hey, Jesse, in your environment, you've been, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jana.
Oh, I was gonna say to your point, John, about the ruling of saying that, comics are just reading for fun, being dismissive, also to Julie's point, is that the idea is that there's not enough words on the page. It doesn't count as much, and that it goes by too fast, or kids are just looking at the pictures. And if we take those justs out, the operational words are reading, looking at pictures, taking in a story. Yes, you absolutely need to, address decoding and phonemic awareness and all of those, base components, but also looking beyond that to the comprehension of the story. I mean, think about, we have so much sequential art in our lives. We don't even think about infographics when we're reading to see, a more complex concept broken down. Can you imagine trying to put together something from IKEA without the pictures? That would be a nightmare.
Right.
Evacuation procedures on a plane. Those are sequential art. You're giving information in art, but that doesn't mean that there's not a heavy cognitive load, or can be a heavy cognitive load on the comprehension component. And I think those dismissives that's just you're counting words, and there's far more to telling a story than the number of words.
Could I jump in there, actually?
Oh, please do. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually have a collection of airline emergency instructions from when I was a kid, because I loved comic books so much, and there they were sitting right on the airplane, to the point of fun. Yeah, the visual literacy piece, traditional educational structures seem to see visual literacy sort of as training wheels for actual reading. And so that as soon as you've gotten through the picture books, off come the training wheels, get rid of the pictures, and you're left with text. But you would never say to a math teacher, are you done with addition? All right, skip over decimals and fractions, go right to geometry. It's like not only are decimals and fractions like important components of the next step, but they're also useful in their own right in so many ways. And this fun thing, and I don't mean to say decimals and fractions aren't fun, but not fun like comics. that fun is both the incredible advantage of comics by way of the investment you get from your students, but they're the incredible disadvantage, as you're suggesting, because there is nothing more subversive and threatening to these traditional structures of education than fun.
It was painful for me, so it's got to be painful for you. Right.
That the perception of fun from the other end, from the student end, is that we are coming to meet them where they are, that this fun thing gives them a sort of an ownership over the material. And if it's a shared material, something that we both have a stake in, then suddenly they have a stake in their own education. You can't have a better student than one who is invested in their own education.
Right.
I think also we want to remember too that it can be dangerous to also go into it assuming that it's going to be fun for all readers, right? Nothing is going to have the same experience or impact or impression for everyone. I think all of us who are teachers know we haven't fully engaged and excited every student by presenting a graphic novel or comic in our lessons. And so emphasizing that fun component as well, to the detriment of like the skills and the work and the engaging, the productive struggle we're going to actually engage in as we work through the text and acquire new tools for telling stories. And just speaking to the point about visual literacy having a long history, I think what is new about it is that it generally used to be siloed. You know, it was something that was happening in design classes or art teachers were really fluent with. But what's sort of changing with graphic novels covering so many different content and subject areas, science topics, history biographies. There's even a recent one that came out about how voting works, written for adults. You know, the examples don't end, but that really these visual literacy skills that are well established and the pedagogy is out there needs to be brought to all content areas and all grade levels so that students everywhere are incorporating these strategies for making meaning of the visuals that they're saturated with.
Yeah, a conversation I had with Susannah, actually it's been kind of ongoing with Susannah and Jana over a few weeks, was about the cognitive aspects of the act of reading that really isn't taught much these days. Susannah, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, it should be taught more and more, and
Right.
it should be taught more and more. There's been this big debate in this country, and it's the reading words and other things are really, that's another conversation. But the truth of the matter is the ability to interpret information is what we're talking about here. And that cognitive relationship between the visuals and the words, which by the way, doesn't mean that the visuals help you decode the words, which is a fallacy that's out there. So we're not talking about the 3 cueing system here. I just have to put that out here. But we are talking about the fact that if I develop some content knowledge, and if I have some schema, it may then actually trigger what I hypothesize some of those words are, which is different than helping me to decode them. And interestingly enough, right before this webinar, I just got up another webinar talking about the fact that the state of Connecticut is very excited because we're literally going to have new reading legislation. And because so many of the teachers in the state of Connecticut do not know the science of reading and don't know how to teach reading and give students the skills they need to make those connections so that they can move through what many of us believe are the 5 big ideas in reading instruction, moving from phonological awareness through alphabetic principle, acquiring some fluency with vocabulary and comprehension. And this is where the graphic novel comes in and is so incredibly important, because you have to do everything in the graphic novel. You have to acquire vocabulary and you have to be fluent, and your accuracy, rate, and prosody to be fluent can be demonstrated. And there are just so many things. So the truth of the matter is we could probably teach a segment of the population that has not traditionally learned to read if we integrated more graphic novels as an option so that we can increase the number of students who are currently learning to read by using it because they do think it's fun, by using it because they can capture some information in a visual way. And so the truth is that becomes absolutely quintessential if we want to increase the reading statistics across all cultures, populations, and genders. It's possible that we have a tool that will help us with at least the motivation and the content and the vocabulary and all the aspects of it. But we have siloed it. I love that Shveta used the term siloed, because we've siloed it, saying that it's not okay. You know, I have to read Little Women. I can't read a graphic contemporary interpretation, but yet I could read a classic prose Little Women and somebody else might read Joe, and we could still talk about the same big ideas and concepts. And that's key. And now I'm going to be quiet.
I'm going to go to Julie. For some reason, in 3rd grade, we take picture books away from kids and force them into text.
Yeah.
And like, that has got to be one of the most I remember that moment as a kid. So how do we recover from that, and how do we address that?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I love teaching middle school is because there's still a little kid inside this big kid that the world is trying to force to be an adult. And so I love bringing picture books into the classroom, but then also graphic novels and comics and things like that, and allowing it to be a really safe space, because those pictures do, just like you guys are saying, enhance the reading experience. And when we take those out, One, reading becomes less accessible to some of our kids or less interesting. But I was even thinking, and I'd love to hear Jana and Susannah's thoughts on this. Today, like the critical thinking aspect, when we think about like Bloom's taxonomy and things like that, when we're asking a who or what level question, those really low level questions of a prose piece versus a picture book or a graphic novel, now they're having to take information from a picture and a word and synthesize it. So now we've taken what would have been originally a really low level question and taken it actually to a really high level question because they're having to use that synthesis. And so I think that when we lose those pictures, one, we lose readers, which is a huge problem in our society with illiteracy rates, but we also lose a lot of context for conversation and academic dialogue, and then even that higher level blooms. I don't know if that actually answered your question, but
I mean, that idea that picture books are for everyone. I love how so many libraries across the country have renamed their picture books, the everybody books or the everyone. This has kind of happened over time, or even, but you're so right on this. The truth of the matter is I like to say that graphic novels are the perfect way to swim in the sea: synthesis, evaluation, and analysis. So if you really want students to swim in the sea, then have a piece of material that's complex enough for them to have something that's worth discussing or grappling with, because that idea of grapple is so incredibly important for success. And it's also important for failure, because if you look at something then once and you don't get it, and then you find a strategy to go back to figure it out, you've actually built a much stronger connection in your brain than if you got it right the first time. So I love what you're saying, Julianne. I mean, it's so on target.
And Jana, go ahead and tag on to it. But before you do, I've got two questions in the holding pen that I'll go to right after you go ahead and tag on to that.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I think to Susannah's point about, using a picture as a decoding tool, and that's not how that works. I've given up trying to decode tool. And I think to the point about moving from pictures with text straight to text alone at third grade, it just speaks to the initial viewing of those pictures as vehicles for decoding instead of storytelling elements on their own. Like if you're just going to do a rebus for me, like that's not truly integrating the art with the pictures, which is what the graphic novel medium offers.
All right, so this first question is one, it starts fires, which I love. And I'm gonna let Jesse take the first swing at this. But here's the question from Brenda Engelhenner. Graphic novels are our #1 borrowed book at the moment. Not surprising, and probably will be for a long time. We are discussing using a mature sticker on in our library on graphic novels. So for example, a 14-year-old can read with a parent's permission a 16+ rated graphic novel. What do you guys on the panel think of this? Jesse.
Yeah, we do that. Actually, we've done it for a while, just to let the student know what they're heading for. And of course, imagery has a different kind of impact, certainly by way of a parent's reckoning with the material than seeing things in text. So yeah, we're for the stickers on it as a way of acknowledging and alerting people to the fact, but with librarian discussion, there's a wide range to what mature means for us.
A lot of it has to do with your collection development policy, right? And that doesn't matter whether it's a school or public library. You still have the same kind of standards you have to create for the books you're buying, correct?
Absolutely.
Julie, how does that work with your school district?
Yeah, so on our campus, I know our librarian tries to, we have to keep it all within 6th through 8th grade. So we have a couple books that if it says 8th and up, then they can use that. We don't have any stickers, but she just really uses the filter of, our kiddos self-filter. And we really try to give our kids permission to return books all the time. So you can always abandon a book. If you have a book that makes you feel comfortable, you get it and you go, eek, then just turn it back in. And so because we have that dialogue with our students, they're mature enough typically to know as soon as something is not for them and return it. But I know that if you have parents that are maybe very involved in the book choices, then that might be a little bit different.
Is that more in line with subject matter versus images though?
I would say the images are even like, we have a copy of Hey Kiddo on our campus,
Right.
and there's some curse words that are really brightly, boldly put into the print. And so while those might be in plenty of other books on the shelves, because they were in that big, bold font, mom and dad saw it and said, no.
Right.
So it's more of the visual component, whether it's about words or pictures.
Right. Jesse?
Yeah, I want to second that. The pictures, as I mentioned, hit a lot harder, particularly the parents. I also wanted to mention that it is a lot about in how the books are, the graphic novels are shelved in the library, and we have ones for older kids a little higher up. And there are a lot of ways to cue kids about what they should be heading for.
All right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I want to add something, John, to that. As a person who's researched what kids who are, for lack of a better term, reading up do, the research is really quite clear that kids who read up or read 2 or more years above what you would think a child of that chronological age would read do one of 3 things. They pick up a book, they don't like it, they put it down. They skip the parts they're not ready for. And the third thing is, this is really shocking, they talk to somebody about it. And so unless it's mold, we actually don't have any evidence that a child has died from a reading related disease except mold. And there were very few cases of that, actually.
Go ahead, Shveta.
I wanted to just add a little anecdote that when we're having conversations with parents about visual imagery in books seeming inappropriate or illicit in some way, or graphic, actually, too graphic, it's a reminder that a lot of that content is in the books that are text heavy that they're reading. And the advantage here is that they can see it. They know right away that it's there. And that the graphic novels and comics reading experience is more collaborative in that way when kids bring those books home. I have this story I wrote about for Book Riot, actually, when I reviewed New Kid by Jerry Craft, which we're also familiar with now. But when I first brought it home, a review copy of it, and I was reading it for work for myself, my 8-year-old daughter could not help but end up reading it over my shoulder because she could see the images in the book I was reading, and it ended up becoming this collaborative experience, even though some of the topics may have been beyond what she would have chosen for herself to read about. And so that graphic novel really allows for that shared reading experience about content that might be overly mature for a student. It's a opportunity, as an entry point for healthy conversations in the home, as opposed to students reading that behind this either like an iPad or something that's just pure text that as you're walking by the couch or their bedroom, you don't know what they're reading about.
We're getting better too, as in the distribution, wholesale, and even the publishers on describing the content that goes into those books. I remember a couple months before 300 came out, that this conversation was really hot and heavy. There was all these issues with people being surprised, mainly the buyers being surprised with the content that was coming in, and books were not being shelved in the appropriate places because no one really paid attention to this just yet. And the first time I really got to see it right in front of me was there was a Borders bookstore in the CNN Plaza in Atlanta, and they had Lost Girls and 300 on the bottom shelf with a bunch of little kid books. And I just hit the brakes, like you could hear my brain go, ah! And so I went over and I asked the manager, I said, why are those down there? He goes, well, they're comics. I said, no, that's adult content that needs to go up, and it's heavy subject matter. And while the pictures are pretty and colorful, you need to really know what you're doing here. And I think we have gotten better. There's still some surprises from time to time, but we have gotten better at this, haven't we?
I mean, I think you guys are making so many good points. I'm just gonna like go with the flow is one of these examples. The concepts in this would be are in a prose book, maybe not enough, by the way. But the truth of the matter is that it's no more objectionable, and it shouldn't be objectionable at all in this format, but it might be more accessible to some readers than if it were totally in prose and other things. So I think these are so many things. And John, you bring up the really good point that just because it has a lot of pictures in it does not necessarily mean that it's for really young kids.
Right. Hey, I got another question I want to go to real quick. Vanessa Fletcher asked earlier, how do we make sure we don't take the fun out of reading graphic novels when we teach them as literature?
Don't dissect them.
Go ahead, Shveta.
Well, I want to speak to that. I saw that question there early, and I was like, "Ooh, when are we going to get to this one?" Because a big value here is comics really demand the reading experience to be collaborative. Because we might assume that images are accessible to everyone, and that certain iconic representations and visuals are universal in what they connote and invoke in our thinking. But I know there's really cool research always coming out from Neil Kahn, so many books about the fact that it's actually not universal. It all depends on your prior exposure to images. And even though in certain parts of society we are saturated with that, we can't assume that all our students also have that experience. And so he's even shown that things like something as universal as a circle with 2 dots and a semicircle, a smiley face, an emoji, would have the same connotations for different people. But when he's looked at it from people all over the world, different experiences with visuals in their background, it's not universal. And so I know in my own classes, I've taken that and really seen it firsthand, even in like 12th grade AP English literature, where students are looking at an image in Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, and the way that they each interpret a facial expression of a young girl wearing a veil, it's very clear that who we are determines what we see. And so in order to make meaning from what you're seeing in the text, that collaborative discussion around the visuals is key, because undoubtedly students will walk away from that having seen something differently from what they first came to it with. And that's fun. I can tell you that's fun for all of us, to walk away and see, well, oh, I didn't even notice that detail. What is it about me and my experience that made it so that I saw this when I looked at that page, but my peers saw this? That's world expanding.
I will want to back that up 1,000%. I'm teaching a high school class on the socio-political implications of the superhero right now. And like, to step out of the sort of standard teaching graphic novels as though they are a text, and using that visual element in that collaborative way where the students are able to penetrate through layers and teach each other things, to allow the students to take a leadership role with those things and give them that kind of ownership of the lesson that goes with it, is massively powerful for the students, and surprising for them too. And surprise is always a great way to keep boredom at bay.
This would also be a great opportunity to pair with an art teacher in your school, visual arts, have them come in and talk about form and color and contrast and shading, and to the point about symbolism, depending on what kind of content is being covered. Typically, it could be an incredible integrated lesson on that kind of thing. If you have something that's more abstract or something that's, Alex Ross photorealistic, and why that artist was chosen for that story, why the shading, why that character is off panel in that story. And also, I found it a lot of fun and also very helpful in terms of getting teachers on board to explicitly describe the vocabulary of graphic novels, talk about a panel, a gutter, a border, a thought balloon, a pointer, all these components. And then when I I'm lucky enough to have a 4th grade teacher that allows me to come in and talk to her students about graphic novels. It's low-key recruiting for my 5th grade comic book club early, but she's always very accommodating. And we go through all that kind of vocabulary. And then I equate, you know, this is a speech balloon. If you had a chapter book, what would we use to signify dialogue? Now we're talking about quotation marks, and now we're embedded back into the literature component, the decoding component, but we're still, you know, honoring that it is a visual art medium.
This ties nicely into a question that's been in the holding pen for a little bit. This is H-E-R-I, I'm sorry, Hari, I think that's how to pronounce your name. What strategies do you recommend when pairing a graphic novel with either a historical fiction text like prose novel, or even pairing it with a fictional podcast? Who wants to take a swing at that?
I wouldn't mind starting just because this is part of what my research is on.
Go ahead.
This is when we organize text around big ideas, patterns, change, survival, and the kids are introduced and or select anywhere between 5 and 7 different texts that they might read, and they come together to generate the 3 essential questions that they think might be useful. So if kids are reading about injustices, or they may read a graphic novel, they may read a prose text, they may read a historical fiction novel, they may read straight nonfiction. And they come in and their first question is, what is justice? And what are the examples of justice and injustice? And we have these amazing conversations that they want to audio tape because they're talking about something that is worthwhile and they're supporting it. And if they don't think they have a good first show the first time, they come in the second class and they have posted it, if that was a verb, everything, and marked it so they can defend their ideas. But basically we say, if you can bring a picture book to that conversation, if you can make the case for that picture book, so someone, you know, might bring What is a Refugee, or a really complex picture book like The Journey, which is an international book that was imported into the United States. It's very visual. And so we don't separate the graphic novels. You're the graphic novel group and you're not the graphic novel group. We're organizing it around really big things that are worth talking about.
Julianne, one of the questions that came in from the registration was, what do you do about a kid that wants to read below their level? And I did this kind of double take, like, okay, this kind of ties into that fun thing, but how do you address that? And the part 2 of that with the next question was, what if all they want to do is just read comics? So how do you address that?
Yeah, usually I get those questions from the parents of, hey, my kid only wants to read comics. Can you give them some different recommendations? And I usually say, I can give you some other graphic novels they'll love that are on different subject areas, if that's what you want, or something like that. I think, you know, there's just so much confidence that's built in reading, no matter what level of the text it is. And so that's what builds lifelong readers. Now, are there certain skills that as a language arts teacher and a reading teacher that I want them to develop, and those kind of things? Absolutely. And so those might demand a higher level of text or lexile level when I'm teaching that skill, but they're reading on their own time. Like, I don't want to call it below their level or above their level, because personally, I love sitting in the corner of our library and getting to pick out some children's books or picture books and sit and read those. Like Finding Winnie, I love that book and love the experience with that book, and go back and reread it all the time for myself as an adult. And so I think we're asking the wrong questions. If they're loving their reading or they're enjoying reading, then maybe we want to just introduce them to some other topics or other authors, even within that genre, to expand their diet, if you will, but not necessarily expand on the level of rigor that we think they should or should not be reading at.
Go ahead, Shveta.
Yeah, I love what Julie's saying there. I want to build off of that too, that also you can deepen that interest, right? So when students are really interested in tinkering with the remote and taking it apart and finding out how it works, you know, we don't say, no, he does that all the time. That's too much. He needs to he needs to I don't know, whatever, do science experiments now, like so there's this tendency to pull children away from having that opportunity to dive deep into what is captivating them. So if you have a student who's exclusively reading one medium, that's actually not that common, that they're going to be that exclusive about something, and it's something to address and nurture and deepen that, give them that depth and complexity with that experience. So for example, I've seen kids who've been encouraged to, for example, create their own version of a Wimpy Kid, or I've seen someone who actually has parodied the Wimpy Kid format, you know, kind of critiquing it and making fun of it by making their own version of it through the lens of a female protagonist, or through the lens of the oldest brother, or so if they're interested in that, great, let's have them use the tools of that medium. Let's have them really consider the choices and the subtleties of it, and just go further with that interest.
This really, as Julianne was sort of pushing at, is a lot in a way about educating parents. Like, are you asking the right questions? Are we looking at this from the right perspectives? And that's scary for a lot of people, is having to get the parents to understand something that they have known for sure all their lives is a certain way. And it pays to develop strategies about how you can approach parents. And even I like to keep a small supply of very worthwhile graphic novels that when an irate parent comes to me, I say, this is a conversation we should definitely have. Would you mind having a look at this? And then, you know, come back and let's talk about it tomorrow, or whenever you're done.
I like to remind them that, you know, as an adult, you get to choose whatever you want to read. That's what you enjoy. You read whatever genre you're into, like week after week after week. Why don't you allow your child to experience that too? Okay, digital. When digital first started to happen, and everybody remembers it was going to be the end of books, the end of hard copy. And because to me, a graphic novel is such a piece of art, there's this tactile experience. But I've really kind of made peace with the subversive opportunity that digital allows readers. Do you guys have any kind of touch point there, or a part of arguing against or for digital in this space, or how do you feel?
I am a reformed traditionalist. I used to think that the book itself was a sacred vessel, and that is how the story was delivered. And you do not dog your pages. You do not use receipts, dirty receipts. No, you find a bookmark. I have since reformed and now accept that it is, it's a delivery system for the story itself. So if you are, now that being said, making sure you have appropriate resolution on your device, making sure that it's in color if it was initially created in color, if it's layout wise, making sure that if it's a 2-page spread that you are on a device that shows both pages side by side as it was defined. But I think it's allowing not only for greater reach of these titles and accessibility, not only the environmental impact, making less physical materials, and also being able, again, to reach farther places, and also allowing a lower bar for the price of admission to create. So no longer do you have to go through a publisher and go through all these hoops and gatekeepers and all these structures that are in place. You know, you got Microsoft Paint, you can make a comic. I mean, you got something you can do to put these basic pieces together. You can make a comic. And I think that when there's no longer only one entrance into the castle, you get a lot of people storming it, and things change that way.
Well, going back to that point about kids reading stuff that brings them joy and allows them comfort in establishing their ability to read, one of the brilliant things that I've come to make peace with on digital is that if a kid in 8th grade wants to read Geronimo Stilton, nobody knows because it's on their device. And they can read it as much as they want to. And adults already have this example. 50 Shades of Grey sold a lot of Kindles. And, you know, that may some people may kind of go, ooh, why'd you bring that up? But I remember seeing more Kindles when that book launched than at any other time. Before then, Bezos was bragging about how many he was selling, and we never saw them in the airport. We saw iPads all over the place. But yeah, Kindle sold that. Go ahead, Jesse.
I just wanted to jump on that. Yes, absolutely, and that's a great way for kids to do it. We couldn't afford to buy books in the high school, the right comics, all the comics we were reading for the high school class, the actual physical copies. We had to get a Comixology account so that the whole class could read. And kids were really frustrated at first because it was a terrible reading experience on a computer, but it has a lot to do with the device. We found a bunch of old iPads and we got them reading on the iPads, and it was much smoother and much easier. Right, so again, you're coming to the kid. If they're more comfortable with that, then do it. That said, there is a huge difference between reading comics done years ago before the concept of anything digital was around, and comics that are done with the awareness that they might be viewed digitally too.
Right.
I think the other thing we have to also remember is that so many of the graphic novels kids are reading were created digitally. I mean, Jerry Craft created New Kid and Class Act, and as did many other people digitally. So I'm with Jana. I was definitely a paper papyrus smelling book girl. But the truth is that we have to be open to the possibility. And I love what Jesse just said about the fact. So my old 2.0 iPad actually shows books and the picture book galleys and the graphic novel galleys better than my phone or my Apple Air or whatever. It's just, it somehow works. It's the right size. I can see a page spread.
Okay, you guys, I'm going to go to the show and tell portion of this. So I just got the warning. We've got the 15-minute heads up, which is now 12 minutes. Cool. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start. I've got the first two.
Okay.
In now graphic novel publishing in the industry, one of the easiest things to do and mess up is adaptation of classic literature. And a really good friend of mine pointed this out. He had gotten a copy of Romeo and Juliet. And he says, Shakespeare was all dialogue. Everybody knows this, it's playwright, but they forget that and they call it classic literature. And so he pointed this out about the fight in the Market Square, where you have Team Montague and Team Capulet going at it. And you get this close-up of the buildup of the anger between the two parties. And then this is the dialogue. This is Shakespeare's only direction. They fight. But what's great about this manga artist here is they captured the mayhem and destruction that this impact had on this community. And so it's even much more powerful experience for that reader to see just the level of destruction. So you get more of the meaning of what Shakespeare had intended in that part of the conversation.
So kind of talking earlier about that theme of fun and keeping the fun in it, even while we're learning, even while we're getting real rich meaning from it and acquiring tools to tell our own stories. This is just an image from Persepolis that we had done a close reading of in class. And I noticed that in my students, I have them keep panel journals where they can record their close readings or their questions or their slow looking observations. And the first year I did those journals, I noticed that one of my students was actually several of them, this is just one example, was showing that they were inspired by some of the techniques we were noticing in the panel work and applying them to their own lives to tell their own stories, which was going to be their end culminating project, was to use the tools that they had observed and studied in Marjane Satrapi's work to tell their own short mini graphic memoir. So here you can just see this is a point in Satrapi's story. It's about her life growing up in Iran during the Cultural Revolution, the Islamic Revolution, and a lot of her friends and everyone they knew had fled Iran at this point. And her family chose to stay because she went to this French school and they really saw that that was going to be critical for her future. And we had talked about sort of the replicating image of these darkened trees and how the bird's eye view and how the pathway narrows and exits the panel in the top right corner, kind of made it look like mimicking that funhouse effect, and that Margie, we only see her from the back, from above, that some students were saying it looked like she was going into this unknown future and was uncertain. And so this student who had moved to our high school very late in 11th grade, and this was a very intimidating school. It took up a whole city block. It had very severe architecture. There were over 6,000 students enrolled. And he is drawn similarly there from this bird's eye view, those windows kind of mimicking that same replication of the trees in Satrapi's work. And so just that idea that that even really closely analyzing and studying a text doesn't necessarily have to take away the fun of it, or really the value that students are seeing. Hey, this is something that I can actually use to tell my story, or in some cases my students were using it to heal, or to impact change in their community, or to affect their peers who they knew were going to see their visual work. So we can just leave it at that. You don't have to show the next one, John, and we can move on to someone else.
All righty, and Jesse's up next.
Okay. This is something that I use from American Born Chinese by Jean Yang with the 8th grade a lot, to because they read this book, and the teachers asked me to come in and sort of talk about reading comics, and how when we read prose, there are certain things we look for, symbolism and metaphor and all of this, and ways that we can draw more out of comic book reading. And this is just one of the most incredibly complex emotional pages I have ever seen in a comic, from the way in the first panel it sets the mood, and the distance in the second panel, the thoughtfulness of it. But the little miniature metaphor that, if you take a moment to actually to take this in, the extraordinary complexity of what is going on here, both his emotional desire, the racial elements that are going into this, the pieces of self-identity that are woven through this, is an extraordinary piece of work without a single word in it. Just these small, relatively figurally simple iconographic images, what they can put across to you in the right placement always bowls me over. And I hold this up as I always have the 8th graders, raise their hand to explain to me what's happening in this. And they can go deeper and deeper. Each one goes deeper than the last one about what was going on. And when we're done, they are all sort of bowled over by what they were able to pull out of this page.
It's amazing how he stops time with every single panel.
It's like every piece is its own little moment, and rife with interpretive pieces.
Right.
So this is from New Kid. I promise we didn't plan it, but a few of us have name checked it. And this is about an African-American boy who's at a predominantly white school. He has to travel from his neighborhood to get to his current school. And he's one of few African-American students. And this is him responding to a peer who is, you can read the dialogue there. Why do they call him Mori-O? I heard because it rhymes with Oreo, but I still don't get it. So think about the conversations you can have with your students. Think about the conversation you have with students. Think about the makeup of the students in your classroom and how that's going to be different depending on if you have African-American students or not, mostly, or few or none. And think about how quickly they might pick up on what that means. Think about the SEL of even the facial expression on him before, and then once he realizes, oh, that's why they call him that. And I think it's an incredible opportunity with 15, 20 words to get across these incredibly complex, like Jesse was saying, these incredibly complex, deep concepts that have these just rippling effects through the social component and through the personal relationships and the ages of these students.
You know, I didn't think it was possible that Jerry could top how great of a book New Kid is, but Class Act, he really did. The next book is even better, which is really pretty amazing.
Yeah. So just talking about some entry books specifically for middle grade, because those are the kiddos I work with. I love all three of these. These are the ones that I will go to. So Smile is for my realistic fiction kids, or even because it's, if you know Raina Telgemeier, her story, Smile and Guts, those are all autobiographical too. So even when we're trying to just teach genre, this is a great one. But I love handing this one to kids because she has such a rich collection, and the images are just so friendly and so, I don't know, welcoming and engaging. And then our students love Hazardous Tales. So my history buffs, I love to give them these, and the comedy element of it. If you know anything about the Hazardous Tales series by Nathan Hale, he has like these little guys that are telling the stories that are super hilarious, but then it's true history. And so this is also great if you're trying to go cross-curricular, like Shveta said earlier. And then
They're his research babies.
Yes.
Yes.
And then the crossover is actually originally a novel in verse. And then this is the graphic novel adaptation of it. And so if you can't get the boy to pick up the novel in verse or the prose novel, then maybe you can get the boy who loves basketball to pick up the crossover graphic novel version. And so really for my reluctant readers, these are kind of the three gateway graphic novels that I will put in their hands. And then these are just, when I was asked, something that sums up why graphic novels in the classroom, it's got to be the pictures of the kids loving it. And so the top left corner is one of my GT classes. One year we did a book club series with different graphic novels, and they did Anya's Ghost is the one that they created some book talk posters for, so they could share those out with other kids and make book recommendations in our building. And then the one on the bottom right, same thing. We also did graphic novel book clubs, but these kiddos, a couple of them, not all three of them, but a couple of them are English language learners. And so I just love that these two pictures show the breadth of application and the breadth of interest level. There's smiles on both my gifted students' faces and my English language learners' faces, and they're both enjoying this unique reading experience to them. And a lot of my gifted kiddos wouldn't have typically picked up a graphic novel because they thought they were too high of a reader or too whatever for it. And so really eliminating the stigmas and kind of evening the playing field there. And then some of the professional reads, you guys asked us for some of those. Mine are actually not specific to graphic novels, but Read Aside by Kelly Gallagher is just one that I always go back to, because if we can understand how schools are killing reading, like it says there in the subtitle, and what you can do about it, then we start making decisions about the books we put in our kids' hands and how we make curriculum decisions through a much different lens. And then there's a textbook, Young Adult Literature in Action, which is edited by Rose Brock. And she has a whole section in there about graphic novels, but also just opening up doors to diverse reading experiences across all genres, diverse authors and perspectives and own voices and things like that, and how we expose our kids to that. So I think why we read graphic novels falls into both of those.
All right, got a couple minutes left. We're gonna, Susannah's next, and then we're gonna have 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion.
I want to just totally support Read Aside, Don't Have a Killer Reader Casserole, and Rose's book. Rose, way to go in Texas there, and other things. Here's just an example of articles on graphic novels in the last couple of years. Some of my favorite articles that I like to use that are just readily available. So you'll have those. We'll probably put those in the chat and other things. And next, John. This is literally, it's a little card that a participant in a workshop wrote in 2014 that I said graphic novels are the most cognitively complex types of text that kids read. And I just threw it on what are obviously examples of really complex text, whether they're retellings or government or other things like that. But the other thing I wanted to mention is Daniel Pennack's Rights of the Reader. Everybody has a right not to read something if they don't want to. Right. Even if it's a graphic novel.
You reminded me of my 9th grade comp teacher. She handed me Jane Eyre because I just took off in reading. She's like, young men, you have to read this. And I was like, I can't. I'm a surfer. I don't care about this girl. And years later, I wind up working on an adaptation of Jane Eyre, and I fell in love with the story. It's just now it was the right time. Then it was not. Okay, 30 seconds of shameless self-promotion. Start with you, Jesse Karp.
Shameless. Okay. I have a book called Graphic Novels in Your School Library. If you are interested in curricular ideas to bring into classrooms or work with kids, it is full of those ideas. I have a couple of young adult novels out, and I have some comics work too. You can find it at my website.
I don't have any projects I'm working on because I'm having a baby in a month, but North Texas Teen Book Festival is this coming week, and it is virtual this year. And that is where I get all of my great comic and graphic novel recommendations. So no matter where you are in the country, you can participate this year. North Texas Teen Book Festival, go look it up. It's free. It's an incredible event. Next Friday and Saturday. Friday is the Educator Day, and Saturday is the day for teens. And on Monday, there's an event called Graphics Con that's going with it that Scholastic is doing. So 10 out of 10 recommend all 3 of those. Look them up. Graphics Con, North Texas Teen Book Festival, Ed Day, and Festival Day.
Julie, I am also working on a baby project. I'm one behind you, 7 months right now, but somehow I also managed to get out a book baby as well. And my book about teaching with graphic novels called Hacking Graphic Novels is coming out in April. For now, you can visit me at shabetamiller.com for a lot of articles I've written about this stuff. And to learn more about the book, which is really framed as 8 solutions to common challenges with teaching with graphic novels. So for people who have never taught with them, they can learn about the challenges already and have some solutions. And for those who've been doing it for years, may see some of their own challenges reflected in that book. And I really just collected the wisdom of so many of us educators who have been doing this for years and interviewed them and profiled their students and included their student work. So it's not just my view, but it's a compilation of ideas from so many great educators around the country and really the world. So that's me. Yeah, thanks.
Things. I am available for Zooming into schools. I do a lot of Zoom things in schools. I throw a lot of my ideas out on Twitter at Sussing Out Books, and I'm really working on bridging this gap between the fact that we can have great literature of all different formats that are out there, and we can also have the science of reading at the same time. So if you're looking to bridge that and do all kinds of things, I'm also moderating a ton of panels, including one with Sophie Blackall. I'll be at the North Texas Book Festival. I'm a big fan of roses and other things like that. And I'm looking for some stuff to replace because I used to run one of the biggest art illustration auctions in the business, and we're looking to replace that event that used to happen at Book Expo. So my students occasionally want to see me. I don't know why.
I have a load of towels going right now. That is my current project. I am really focusing primarily right now on my students. Teaching kids how to communicate clearly with masks on has been a really special treat this year. So I do have a few projects coming out with Epic Books. I am not sure exactly how much I'm allowed to say, but keep your eye open for an author named Jana. I was busy putting in the towels, so I never checked.
Well, thank you. Again, you guys, thank you, all of you, for taking part of this and having this conversation. For our audience, this will be posted to LibraryPass in about a week. We'll have links, all the topics that we were talking about, the books that were brought up, those will all be included in this, and we really appreciate your time. On behalf of the folks at LibraryPass and myself, thank you all. Have a lovely evening.